topic is quite happening now. All right. So why? If you look here, hold on. I know what. Sorry, this is some issue when. Hold on. I think this is weapon hang. Hold on. Sorry for this. Hang. Hold on. To repeat. Open the file again. All right. Just to start with. Okay, so maybe some of you have seen this document, even to read this document. IA published a document about net zero by 2050, somehow a roadmap for the global energy sector. Recent, quite recent, all right? And then maybe you have seen this as well. Asia, all right? They have targeting for the net zero by 2030 for Asia Pacific. Asia Pacific, they are targeting by 2030 in line with the Paris Agreement to limit global warming up to 1.5 degrees C. All right. And then we talk about our, this Japan. Japan started way earlier than that. All right. So even Japan has their own climate mitigation law. Okay. So they have their own targets, by 2050, they got the carbon neutral goal. This was published in 2020. Okay. And then European Union, EU, they have their own targets. All right, by 2050, again, okay, they have their own strategy among EU members. All right, and then this is the recent one. You look at Saudi Arabia, they have money. Now they set a very ambitious target by, Saudi Arabia is the largest, among OPEC members, they are the largest, have the largest reserves in terms of fuel oil. They are also embarking on the net zero by 2060. And they have allocated about 180 billion. Is that they have money. And then come to Malaysia, Petronas even announced that they want to become net zero by 2050. They announced it in last year, 2020. And then we heard about Maybank as well. They stopped financing coal projects, and they have targeted by 2050. And then come our national utility company, KNB, also announced it in August this year. By 2050, become net zero emission capacity. Right? And then after that, we heard the announcement by the government under the first Malaysia plan. Malaysia also have committed, self to become net carbon neutral by 2050. All right, so our Prime Minister recently in somewhere in September under the first Malaysia plan. So government is committed to achieve carbon neutral by 2050. And then same time, we have to report our commitment regularly to the United Nations, right? So we have to report this one every 2 years, all right? And then therefore in reporting, this is requirement to establish some kind of reporting framework for the carbon emission, how to measure carbon. And then we have some program on national corporate greenhouse gas funded by UNDP for Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei, all right? And then I think it's just yesterday, right? Here, all right? At the same time, we have national guidance on voluntary carbon market mechanism, a part of the requirement in this, carbon market reporting on the carbon accounting. All right, so you can look here. You can all these documents you can Google it, no problem. All right, and then one. So just recently concluded COP26. Okay, they have some consensus reached, on the action to address the climate change. Okay, therefore, we can see even before that, now the trend, business must look into this. We have to start now. Business have responsibility to achieve the net zero. So, but there's no one fits all solution. So each business, has to look into strategy. Therefore, you can see here, Shell, they have oil company, one of the largest in the world, targeting to become net zero by 2050 as well, just like Petronas, okay, our national oil company. And then not to forget about the car manufacturers like BMW, targeting, carbon emission by 40% by 2030, and Toyota by 2035, even faster. Okay, not 2050, carbon neutral by 2035. Okay, so this is to give you some feeling. Okay, why you need to link to this. So therefore, this is the reason why this topic was chosen. Okay, therefore I invited Encik Iskandar to talk about what exactly. We go to back to the basics. What is actually net zero and what actually the carbon footprint reporting. Okay, before I hand over to Encik Iskandar, I would like to introduce him. Okay. He's a well-known expert in this industry, industry in Malaysia, way back from 1998. All right, and then he has a vast experience is very active presently in involved and also contributing in various carbon footprint measurement and reporting activities in Malaysia. So he used to work with agencies like Danish agency, Dancer, Denida, UNIDO, UNDP and all that. And he's a regular trainer, okay, always being invited to talk everywhere, okay, not only in Malaysia. He also good, is very specializing in energy management system as well. Okay, so his degree was in engineering, marine from Newcastle University, UK. He's a RIM, research academy major, certified trainer, United Nations energy management system expert. He also solar and thermal expert and energy auditor by the Association of the Energy Engineers USA. So with that, I think enough for now from me. So now I would like to hand over the screen, all right, to my good friend Encik Skadar. Encik Skadar, now the screen is yours.
Thank you, Encik Zaini, for inviting me to share what little bit that I know and understand about carbon management activities, especially with regards to, I think the buzzword currently is net zero. I think we need somebody to ensure that they are muted, because I think it's a bit, there's a few guys who are yet mute their things. Okay. Okay, the topic of my presentation today is basically what is net zero and carbon footprint reporting. As I said earlier, net zero is the buzzword now. Everybody are pledging to go to a net zero in order to address the global warming that is now very happening all over the world. Okay. The climate change is here basically. I think all of us can feel it. It's no longer about trying to stop climate change. It's just that we are now trying to reduce the impact of climate change. If you see over the last 2 or 3 years, we see huge floods in Europe, yet we have droughts in some other part of the world, and we have forest fire in Europe, in Australia, in America. These are all results of change in weather patterns, leading to rising temperatures, extreme weather, which are basically damaging our natural environment. Closer to home, we now seeing thunderstorm wreaking havoc everywhere in Malaysia. I think floods and rains that are of huge volumes are now being experienced by us. These are all basically attributed to climate change, which is a result of global warming. I just took a graph of what could happen to land, especially around Klang Valley on the west coast in 2050, if climate change is not abated. As you can see, those marked in red in the coast of Selangor, Perak, and some part of Negeri Sembilan are going to be inundated with rising sea level. No? Apart from rise in sea level, we have high temperature, droughts and things like that, which also will impact our food supplies, safety, health, and so forth. And in reality, we are running out of time. I remember when I first got involved in carbon-related activities, which was with regards to Kyoto Protocol.
Itu nama masa zaman belajar. Aduh.
Okay. we are running out of time. About 20 odd years ago, when Kyoto Protocol was ratified, the first or the main aim was just trying to keep the level of CO2 concentration in the atmosphere to be below 400 ppm. As it is now, we are in 2020, we have reached that. It is about 400 plus now. So we have breached the first sort of interim targets that we didn't want to reach. I think this is a result of continuous use of energy and things like that that has contributed to CO2 being emitted to an environment. Now that this is breached, we are now looking at trying to stop the increase in global temperature to below 1.5 degrees range. At this temperature increase, we are talking about CO2 concentrations of about 430 ppm. And if we look at the carbon budgets that is available for us to remain below, keeping the CO2 below 430 ppm, it is very, very minimum. Actually, it's only in the region about less than 300 gigaton. Okay, that is if we want to keep it below 1.5 degrees C. If we are looking at a higher range of about 2 degrees C, we have only about 1,000 over gigatons of carbon that is left, that for us to be allowed to be emitted to the environment. So what is this carbon budget? Basically, if we talk about think about this carbon budget, a good analogy is think about a stricken ship in the middle of the ocean. The ship is in a bad position. It has holes around its hull, and it's struggling. It doesn't have sufficient power to reach the island in order to save all the crew in the ship. So what do you need to do in this situation? You have to try to plug all the hole that is causing water to come into the ship. At the same time, you're trying to keep the ship afloat so that you can reach your destination. So these carbon budgets give an indications of the limitations that we have now. When you talk about all this emission, if you look at the carbon clocks that I have on the slide, to reach or to maintain the temperature below 1.5 degrees C, we have less than a decade actually. The way we're consuming CO2, if you look at the top there, it's about 1,000 tons per second. So we have less than a decade. So basically only about 7 years. This clock I grabbed last night to put it on the slide. So if at the current rates of consumption, we are going to be reaching temperature increase of in the region of 1.5 degrees, possibly before even 2030. So where are all these emissions from? If you look at the slides, mostly of the emission is related to the energy that we use. Okay, energy that we use in buildings account for about 17.5%. Energy that we use in transport is about 16%. Industrial energy usage is about 24%. So majority of the emissions are basically related to our use of fossil fuel to make our life comfortable, to make it easy for us to move around, easy for us to produce things. The rest are basically from agriculture, which is about 18%, and only waste account for about 3.2%, while industrial emission related to cement production and other chemical production is about 5.2%. So I think most of us here are probably involved in energy management, business sector. Actually, we have a huge role to play in assisting not just our country or our company, even the whole world, toward reducing our carbon impact by looking at how to optimize, to be efficient in our use of energy. So what is net zero? Basically, net zero is a state where no incremental greenhouse gases is added to the atmosphere. This means achieving a balance between carbon emissions and carbon sink through a combination of emission reduction and carbon sequestration. Attaining net zero requires reducing your greenhouse gas output to zero or getting as close as possible, and then only offsetting your remaining emission via removal, sequestration of equivalent quantity of carbon from the atmosphere. In short, what's continued to be emitted must be removed. Basically, like I said earlier, our carbon budget is limited. In order to ensure that we remain or below 1.5 degrees increase in temperature, we all have to try to go to net zero in order not to use up these limited carbon budgets available. The global timeline to go to net zero basically are looking at middle of this century, which is by 2050. Okay, so if you are when we talk about net zero, we can consider it as either net zero carbon dioxide. This is where most of us are trying to aim for temperature to be below 1.5 degrees with a time target at 2050. What about net zero GHG? Net zero GHG is related to all the other greenhouse gas, the 6 greenhouse gas that have been identified as GHG gases that we need to address. So if we are aiming at maybe a warmer 2.0 degrees temperature increase, the net zero target is toward the later end of this century, between 2070 to 2085. The net zero pathway entails looking at how your emission is. Basically, what is required is that we need to improve our emission by using energy efficiently, by reducing our emission. This can be done through energy efficient or sourcing for a renewable source or carbon neutral fuel that allow us to keep our business as it is without emitting or reducing a lot of the emission by not using fossil or other conventional form of energy. So the target is really not just going to zero emission overall, because when we talk about going to zero, is we just comparing our current business, but our historical emission also we need to eventually address it as well. It's not just sufficient to look at current emission. We have to take responsibility also of our historical emission. That's why as you move forward in your in the net zero pathway, we are looking at carbon removal as well from the environment through whatever technologies that is available. In order to be creditable in claiming or pledging toward net zero, it has to be based on certain accepted scheme. So the ScienceBased Net Zero target is actually the main scheme that people are looking at in order to judge their pledge to a net zero. Now, targets are considered science-based if they are in line with what the latest climate science deemed necessary to meet the goal of Paris Agreement, limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees, but ideally limiting it to about 1.5 degrees C. The main element of science-based targets must include the following. Target must cover company-wide, direct and indirect, or mention as scope 1 and scope 2 emission. This scope 1 and scope 2 emission, you are only allowed to exclude to a maximum of 5%. So basically, when you talk about trying to achieve net zero under this science-based target, you are basically planning to reduce and all your emission related to all your current fossil fuel usage that you burn in your factory, that you use in your car. That's the basic target as mentioned here, the scope 1 and scope 2. The target must also cover a minimum of 5 to 15 years. You can have absolute or intensity target as long as overall absolute contraction approach toward 1.5 degrees is considered. For those whose supply chain emission, those are emission related to your business, your supply chain, your logistics, your service providers and things like that, which under the carbon accounting protocol is called scope C, that are more than 40% of your total overall emission, you are required to have a scope 3 target as well. And the scope 3 target must be ambitious, and it should cover at least 2/3 of the overall supply chain punya emission. On the slides is basically a graph of global emissions from 1925 and the impact of a key historical event over the last few decades. You can see, even with the most recent impacts of COVID, the emission has reduced a little bit in the range of about 6 to 8%. This is not surprising because we are not using as much fuel. We don't travel to work that often during the lockdown, and also one of the biggest what do you call it emission that is airline has almost totally stopped during this period. If you look at the blue and yellow graph, these are the track or pathways of emissions that we need to reduce from where we are now in order to achieve net zero. Okay, so if you want to achieve net zero by 2050 and keeping the temperature increase to be below 1.5 degrees C, the blue curve, steep curve, is what we need to achieve globally. But when you consider the pledges that has been mentioned in the media, either by the government or by corporations all over the world, from the pledges that we have, you can see the red full line. We are in no way approaching close to even 2.0 degrees pathway. However, with the end of the COP26 recently, there were a lot of revised pledges which was announced by many countries as well as corporations. These new pledges do provide some glimpses of hope, but if you look at the possible trajectory, it looks like we are going to miss this 1.5 degrees pathway, and we still need a lot of effort to address in order to achieve net zero by 2050. So when you are committed toward achieving or at least going toward net zero, you have to make climate action commitment. In order to do this, you have to take stock, measure your carbon footprint. Okay? And then by understanding your carbon footprint, what are the hotspots in your carbon footprint, you then develop your strategy and target to help the global community to achieve net zero by 2050. It is then encouraged that all these corporations or companies that are going to be global climate champions of fighting toward net zero, they are encouraged to disclose their targets and commitment. So this is what we see in the pledges that we read, and that was shown by Encik Zaini in his introduction presentation. This disclosure allow the company to take responsibility on their commitment toward climate change. Once this is done with your strategies and your targets, you need to take action to reduce your carbon footprint. There are many ways, like I said earlier. This includes energy efficiency, use of renewable energies. One of the most important thing I think is probably also a lot of behavior changes that not just the corporation, everybody within the corporation, everybody within the nation need to take in order to together move toward net zero. So this is a continuous cycle, because I think the reporting regime is typically every year. So you need to then measure it again, compare your performance against the target, and then disclose it and review your actions toward greenhouse gas reduction. So one of the key steps in order to at least plan toward going to net zero is understanding where you are in terms of your carbon position. This is done by doing a carbon reporting.
Just kinda.
Yes.
May I interrupt before we
Yes.
get to the carbon reporting just now, right? I think you have covered the first part of our topics about the net zero.
Yes.
Would you mind? I think to make it a little bit, interactive, before we go to reporting, maybe we can open to any, just a question from anyone, before we move to the reporting part. So I think, is it okay?
No problem.
Yeah, I think we make it a little bit open. Now I'll level to open this one. Can you unshare screen?
Sure.
So now I'm opening to anyone. Anything that you would like to share, or you have any question for what Encik Iskandar has shared just now?
Okay, can I start?
Yes, please. Your name and where you're from, you don't mind?
Okay, I'm technologist Umar Shukri from Johor and Berhad. Apa ni, daripada Johor lah. Sorry, Mr. Chairman and also Mr. Speaker, can I speak in?
No problem. We are in Malaysia. Don't worry. You can speak in English. No problem.
Dua language but I pun bahasa Malaysia punya orang.
No problem. Please.
Okay, actually, quite interesting topic. But pada saya, kita ni developer rumah. Kita macam bila you share the fact point tadi pasal apa global emission, lepas tu global warming, lepas tu makin teruk, makin sekarang deteriorate, and then COVID-19 adalah baik sikit sebab bila tak ada airline tu. It's a good point. Tapi I nak tanya in term of I punya line of production kita ni buat rumah, banyakkan buat rumah. Is it, I nak tanya Mr. Iskandar, is it, adakah kita ni bila nak sampai 2050 ni, in terms of bila I tengok tadi you tunjuk graf 70% yang buat apa global warming ataupun carbon emission ni daripada sektor construction ke.
Right.
I nak tanya dari segi sektor construction, macam kita ni buat rumah, adakah kita patutnya line kita ni patut buat produce something like solar based rumah future, so that we can reduce that the energy. Because sorry, I'm a civil engineer in background. I'm not a marine engineer like you or electrical engineer. Tapi maybe you can share to the floor. Adakah kita ni maybe in future before 2050 we somehow produce that benda yang less energy macam yalah sekarang ni adakah, and then I pun nak tanya juga adakah you kena collaborate dengan TMB but yalah they are the one Malaysia memang satu Malaysia dia tapau habis. I mean on perspective of view of construction sector,
Understood.
macam mana you can advise me macam itulah.
Understood. Thank you.
Alright.
Okay, I think
Silakan.
I boleh try to get to your question tadi tu. Basically, you just want to nak faham impact in terms of your company punya carbon footprint with regards to your current activity kan, which is basically constructing
Yes.
your
Housing.
properties lah, homes
Properties, yes.
and things.
Right. Okay.
That's why basically when we go to the understanding about carbon reporting, which is the next section of my slide nanti, it will help you to see where and how all of this is then registered as your carbon footprint. All of us semua ada carbon footprint. If you think even of individually pun we have a carbon footprint. So for a company like you from the developing property development punya company, you have your carbon footprint. You have a carbon footprint in terms of how you produce the house, and actually how the house is occupied and used during the life of the house. That become your also part of the carbon footprint. Your supply chain carbon footprint. So it's become your responsibility. So to answer your question, it is now if the company has a goal toward assisting to the global world toward reducing energy use, which include future energy use, you should then start to design and construct energy efficient homes lah.
Homes, yes.
So this is now become part of your strategy moving forward in order to be seen as somebody that is doing something good with regards to carbon reduction. Yes, the answer is yes. You need to look into that, and also basically always, not just how the building is going to be occupied later on, in terms of how the construction is being done in order to now to provide green construction vis-a-vis, then you have also minimal impact on the environment is required lah as we push forward toward this net zero.
Understood. Okay, dah nampak sikit. Thank you, Mr. Iskandar. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Encik Umar tadi daripada Johor Johor hantar big group ni, hantar datang attend ni. Thank you very much. Another one thing, I think Cik Iskandar will cover later on the reporting part. We can see the activities, right? That there we can play your role. Because if you look at, I think for me, if you look at this net zero everything, there are, I showed in my previous introduction, right? So there are no one solution fit all. That's why every business, they have their own way based on the activity on how they can contribute. For example, TMB, they are more supplying energy. Of course, the main part of how to make the energy supply greener, right? So all of us have different way. I think thank you very much for the questions. Okay, I think I'll open one more question before we move on to the carbon reporting part. One more. Yeah. Please. Okay, I got it from the chat box here from Sehnasu. All right. Okay, Cik Iskandar, I see your second question for this one. Okay, the question is that, right? Can I see here? Hold on. Okay, Sehnas, right? Where's the question just now?
Okay, I can read this also.
Where is it? I can see here.
Rasa tu habis tu nanya lah. Sedap ke? Sedap kata.
Okay, one question Iskandar. Ni I can see just now about I can see the question in the chat box. Why this?
Okay, I got it, Zania.
Okay, please,
can I read? Okay, the question from Miss Sena.
Please, yes.
I am an environmental consultancy service provider to RE player in Malaysia, which all of them contribute to carbon credit. However, the power was supplied to the grid to TNB. So does the carbon credit belong to an energy provider or the RE developer? It's a good question. Okay. Basically, it depends on how the agreement between the power purchase agreement between the TNB and the developer are conducted. So this all very much a matter of how the arrangement was done. But in a normal way, the developer will have the rights to the carbon credit related to their project. Okay, but in some cases whereby, especially when we talk about power related, especially for projects that is supported by the government, one good example for us here in Malaysia is the FIT, where basically all of us are supporting it by paying 1.6% of our tariff. Those type of projects, typically because it's supported by the government and the rakyat, it's the carbon related to it tend to remain with the government, not even apa nama tu TNB. So it's very much how it is regulated and how the agreement is signed. That's why a few years back, somebody come and asked me about how he want to put the position of carbon related to his activities in promoting some PV related projects. So what I advise to this client, basically somebody come to them to do NEM, net energy mentoring. What I mentioned to them is you need to address who owns the carbon credit before you even sign, because if it's not addressed in your agreement, then it can become a contentious issue. So short answer to the question is basically it's depend on how your contract was, and if it's not been addressed yet, I think that you need to quickly go and address it before both of you have double claim on the same thing.
Okay, thank you, Iskandar. Please continue with your second part, on the carbon reporting, please. Yes. Thank you for all those who ask questions. We can reserve some more questions after the second part of this.
Right, let's start. Okay, carbon reporting, the most common carbon reporting or carbon inventory protocol is the greenhouse gas protocol that was developed by World Resource Institute and World Business Council for Sustainable Development. This I think was developed in early 1990s or something like that, just after the Kyoto Protocol was signed. This now become de facto reference point for most form of greenhouse gas reporting or greenhouse gas standards. Even the ISO 14064 is based on this GSG protocol. Under this GSG accounting protocol, it has three types of accounting. One is for the entities. The entities is basically for the organization. It consists of combined emission data across an organization operation. It's about emission. Have mostly emission in this report are about that has already been occurred. So when you do your organization GSG accounting, this is the standard that you use. So what you do is you compare emission data against a base year data. So if we are talking about just now going towards net zero, we will want to be seeing a reduction in your at least scope 1 and scope 2 through the years as you go towards 2030 or 2050, depending on where you are in your aim toward net zero. The other type of GSG accounting is the project. These are basically to quantify emission avoided by a project in the future. For question that was raised earlier on about who owns the carbon credit related to projects, this type of accounting is basically with respect to those type of projects. So you are trying to estimate what if scenario based on a baseline. So if you are talking about solar PV, your baseline is basically
yang bagi harga yang atas tu.
Your baseline will basically be TNB grids if you are in Semenanjung, and then with your use of solar as a way to reduce it, then you have an emission reduction. So this type also projects is also can be used for any energy efficiency retrofits to quantify the exact emission associated with that project. The third type of GSG accounting is basically product related. So it's a life cycle assessment. Actually, it's combined data from past and future emission in order to associate the emission related to a product. Okay. So if your company is manufacturing, let's say, an item, and you want to calculate the embodied carbon related to the production and the future use and even disposal of that product, then you have to do all this analysis to come up with this product assessment. So in reality, the entities is where there is a lot of reporting that's currently required now. You're basically trying to report mostly on your corporation organization carbon footprint. If your organization is producing, let's say if you're talking about one small company, I just want to see how this relates to the three relates. If your small company is basically producing one product only, and if you do a product carbon footprint of your one product, in reality, that product carbon footprint is your entity's carbon footprint because it represents all the upstream, downstreams, and your own use of energy in order to produce your product. So I mentioned earlier, ISO also has similar standard adopted using the GSG protocol. The ISO 14061 is exactly the same as the first standard, entity standard, which is the organization reporting. And the part 2 is basically project level reporting. Under ISO, they have their own, I think, I can't remember, I think 14,000 or something. Sorry, it should be 14,000, not 16,000. 14,064. Typo there. Under ISO, you will have life cycle standard as well, which is similar to the products under the GSG protocol. So when you're trying to understand the emission related to an entity, reporting companies, GSG divided the emission related to each type of energy use in that organization to different scope. Scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. Scope 1 are basically what you call emission that you have direct control of. So this will be mostly related to generation or use of fuel within your boundary. So if you have boiler, if you have furnace that burn diesel, MFO, natural gas, all of this fuel that you use to run and manufacture your product is covered under scope 1. This also include non-stationary combustion, such as vehicles that you own. It can be company vehicles, can be company motorbike, company lorries, company van, company aeroplane, company ship, and things like that. All come under scope 1. The other things that is in scope 1 is process emission. This is emission related to your process in manufacturing your product. Fortunately, there are only a few industries or industrial sectors that has a specific emission related to them. These are mainly aluminum, cement, and some electronics sectors. The other things that you need to consider in scope 1 is basically the leakages. these are leakages with regards to your refrigerant. So every year you need to top up your refrigerant in your chiller, in your split unit, and your aircon, because if you look at the top, those are the target gases that we do, so that we need to reduce. So HFCs are some things that you need to account for. The scope 2 pula is with regards to any purchase of energy that you buy from outside. So typically in Malaysia, the only form of purchase energy that we have is basically our electricity. Although there are buildings or industries that purchase steam or chill water from a service provider. So if you're doing that in terms of buying steam or chill water, those are under scope 2. So in scope 2, you have no control about how it is generated, but you have control about how it is being used. So in most, in all reporting, you are required mandatory to report scope 1 and scope 2. Okay, but scope 3, which is very much related to your supply chain, upstream and downstream supply chain, are broken down into 15 categories, 8 on the upstream and 7 on the downstream. These are related to purchase goods and services, capital goods, basically purchase equipment or things like that, and then fuels and energy related activities, which are not included in scope 1 and scope 2. These are mainly leading to leakages in supplies and things like that. Another things in the upstream supply chains are transportations of your purchase goods, waste generated during operation, business travel. If you go meetings and fly all over the world to meet clients, this is under upstream scope 3. Employee commuting is also a component of upstream scope 3, as well as lease assets that you lease in your process. In the downstream, you look at transportation. You will need to look at when you selling not an end product or part of a product, how your product is reprocessed in order to make an end product is also considered in your upstream. And then, as I mentioned earlier, in example that we talked earlier on, if you build a house, how the house is being used in terms of energy carbon footprint is a component of your downstream activities. And then if you are, let's say, if you how it is being disposed of at the end of the life is also your concern, because it's your downstream activities, together with lease asset, as well as franchising and investment that you have. So when you look at the whole scope of emission, especially scope 1 and scope 3, you do not have direct impact on this, but it has to be reported as part of your scope 1 and scope 3. If you are talking about going toward net zero and committed toward SBT, science-based target, all of this has to be addressed by engaging with your stakeholders, supply and contractors and things like that, to work together toward reducing your emission. So if you look at the relationship between the supply chain, so basically what scope 3 is basically is typically scope 1 and scope 2 of your suppliers. If you can see that. So basically that's what it is. So if I am involved in logistics, I own a lorry and I support you. So my emission is your scope 3 emission. So my scope 1 and scope 2 emission is basically your scope 3 emission. So this is whereby as you go all down the supply chain later on, you will not be surprised to see all of us will need to start measuring and reporting our scope 1 and scope 2, because it will trickle down all the way to everyone. All right. So if you look at the three scope, it is not surprising that scope 3 will possibly be the biggest emission of your of all the three. Okay, so if you can see, this is some example that I get from EcoChain. They analyze a few sectors. There's a good example, the scope 1 and scope 2, which is in the middle. Only the biggest one is only about 20%, which is life science sector, but majority of it is either in the upstream or in the downstream. If you look at electronic, their own operation is probably be the lowest, but they have the highest in terms of scope 3 downstream. This is why, this is the reason why, is because they have to account for how the electronics that they produce is being used, being disposed, and things like that. So that's why it is almost 90% of any electronic sector companies will have a very high downstream scope 3. So how do you do a GSG reporting process? The first thing that you need to do is basically define the scope and boundaries. When you do your corporate or entities carbon footprint, you need to identify your overall boundary, which means basically which companies that you own, which companies that you have share in, which of subsidiaries has to be reported under you. Okay, there are ways to look at this, and these are what we call in the GSG reporting as consolidation method. You can either look at how much equity that you have in the companies, or you can look at who is controlling the finance of the company, or you can look at who is controlling the operation of the company. Depending on what consolidation approach that you choose, you then account for those specific companies that come under you. Once you define and identify the physical boundaries, as it were, then you need to define the scope of emissions, different scope of emissions that you need to report. Like I said earlier, scope 1 and scope 2 is mandatory in all reporting, but scope 3 is now getting more important, because if you are looking at going to a net zero, you need to quantify your scope 3. And then if it's, like I said earlier, more than 40% of your overall emission, then you need to address all your scope 3 emission to set target for that. So once you define the scope, you then start to look at, collect all the data. Data for your scope 1 are quite easy in the sense that it is basically your fuel bills, how many liters of fuel that you purchase in a year. Data for your scope 2 is much easier still, because it's possibly be only your TNB bill, your kilowatt hour. And then with all this data, calculate and convert them into ton CO2 equivalent. And then you prepare the report. So these are the process of GSG reporting. So what is a carbon footprint then? Total greenhouse gas emitted by an activity or organization over time. It is measured in ton carbon dioxide equivalent, T ton CO2e. The CO2e is basically equivalence of all the 6 GSG gas converted to CO2 equivalent. How do you calculate it? You calculate carbon footprint by multiplying the activity data with relevant emission factors. I think if you guys are from the energy related sector, you will know that 1 kilowatt hour of electricity used in Semenanjung the emission factor is about 0.585 kilogram CO2 equivalent. That's the latest that we have for 2017. If I'm not wrong. So what are the example of activity data? I mentioned it earlier on. For your scope 1, it will be how much fuel that you use, what type of fuel that you use. You know, you might have 2 or 3 different type of fuel used in your organization. I mean, different fuel for your boiler, different fuel for your trucks, different fuel for your forklift and things like that. How to account for emission related to commuting. It's basically driving. I know, stop going to office or even meeting customers. This is also mainly can be used using the fuel volume, amount of fuel purchase. If you do not have the exact amount of fuel purchase, the other way to look at it is by using secondary data, what we call kilometer travel. So that can also be used as a information to convert into CO2. The same with transportations or logistics. These are mainly typically represented in kilometer distance. And for waste, I mentioned about electricity, and for waste, these are typically in ton or kilogram waste segregated into different type of waste because each will have their own emission factor related to it. So as you prepare collection data, these are information that you need in terms of your excuse me, preparing the report. So once you have the report, you need to strategize of how to reduce your emission. I think this is an excellent way of looking at what could be done. I got this from the Boston Consulting Group in terms of slowly reducing your overall emission towards net zero. So the first option is, of course, looking at circularity or circular economy. This is whereby you either reuse or make use of your waste to generate things. The most obvious, I think, in terms of circularity is if you think about our palm oil mill. Our palm oil mill are using their own waste to generate power to help process the palm oil. Then the next obvious thing to look at is to be more efficient in terms of energy as well as in other resources that you use. Then, of course, you look at renewable energy in your energy source, and maybe, well, you know, if you have thermal use, thermal demand, you need to look at fuel switching. You might want to, you know, use biomass as a source if it is available. Biomass could be some, you know, source from your neighbor nearby. So these are innovative ways of looking at how to address with regards to your thermal demand footprint. One thing that we often neglect is, of course, we can get hot water from the sun as well. So if your process only required temperature in the region of 60 to 80 degrees, by using a solar thermal collector, you can then replace fossil fuel as a source of heating water by heating it from the sun. And of course, we also now, as we move, or at least the whole world is going to a net zero, we're talking about hydrogen as well as a transition fuel. So eventually this, hopefully this technology will then mature by the time we are going to at the end, closer to 2050s. So technologies such as low carbon hydrogen and carbon captures will then be required to eventually help us to reach net zero. One thing that would be good to keep in mind is that I think the whole world is now looking at and thinking of electricity as the primary energy. Rather than electricity now, we look at electricity as secondary energy. I think in the future, it could be, I'm not saying whether it could be that electricity will be seen as the primary energy, whereby electricity then be used to either produce green hydrogen, and green hydrogen will then be used to fuel, convert to liquid to fuel industries and so forth. I think in northern part of Europe, they are developing some demonstration sites to capture wind from wind energy to electricity to generate hydrogen. The key solution to reduce greenhouse gas is basically, I think we need to phase out fossil, and one of the first thing that we need to phase out is coal. If you follow the recent Glasgow COP29, there was some statement about phasing out of coal altogether from the generation mix as we could move forward. We need to increase investment in clean energy and energy efficiency. Buildings need to be retrofit in order to address their heating or cooling demand. I read somewhere a few days ago. It's quite surprising to read about it. The demand for cooling in US, the whole of US, is almost equivalent to the whole energy demand, electricity demand of Africa, which I don't know whether it's true or not, but if it's true, it is really huge. So we need to decarbonize key industry such as cement, steel, and plastic. These are the industries that has associated process emission to it. We need to shift to electric vehicles. I think this is now moving very fast, and we need to change our behavior. We need to increase use of public transport. We need to decarbonize aviation and shipping. So the aviation industries and the shipping industries are now working hard at trying to find what alternative fuel or technology is most suitable for them in order to address this. One of the biggest thing is, of course, we need to halt deforestation and restore degraded land. The problem with global warming is it's not like it's like a vicious cycle. It's not like, it is a vicious cycle. The more we progress, the more we need to clear land. But what we do when we clear forests, we are removing the very thing that help us to absorb the CO2 from the environment, the sink. So we need to halt any deforestation, and we need to start to plant trees and improve this natural sink that we have. Also, we need to think about reducing food loss and waste. I think the best thing about when you talk about food is to basically buy local, eat local. And of course, I think number 10 is if you are a vegan here, we need to eat more local planted vegetables, and eat less meat in our diet. In order to be seen as leader in going toward net zero, there are basically these three reporting programs seems to be the most popular. CDP is a carbon disclosure program. They are the one that basically supported the GSG protocols, that use GSG protocols in all the reporting. They now have over 9,000 plus companies with over 50% global market capitalization reporting to them. The second one, which is the science-based target that I mentioned earlier on, which is very much related to commitment to net zero. They have more than 1,000 companies already registered with them and committing to it, at least submitting their target to this science-based target to be verified by the reporting body. The other things that is quite popular is RE100, which is renewable energy, 100% renewable energy movement. This involves quite a lot of top companies committing towards reaching 100% renewable energy within certain periods. How are we doing? I go back to the same slide that I showed earlier on. We still need a lot to do. As you can see, it's a big drop from where we are in order to reach net zero by 2050, in order to keep the rise in temperature to be below 1.5 degrees C. And this required all of us working together, changing our behavior and addressing our emission. Again, just to emphasize what exactly are needed, these are basically with regards to the point that I mentioned earlier. In order to get to reach or to keep temperature below 1.5, we need to ramp up renewable energy by 6 times. We need to transition to electricity now at 22 times faster. We need to increase tree cover by type 5. We need to improve electricity by 1.5%, increase use low carbon fuel 8 times faster, and we need to remove coal 5 times faster than where we are now. Okay, point to ponder. Climate crisis is here. Demand for action is required of everyone. To remain relevant, all companies have to take action on their carbon footprint. Time for action is now. In certain countries in Europe, when you want to bid for tender, it is no longer sufficient to just provide your financial statement. Bidders has to also provide their environmental statement as well as their carbon footprint statement in order for them to qualify. So I think this is something that we have to brace ourselves for, because sooner or later we will need to look at and understand our carbon footprint. And I think the sooner we look at it, the sooner we address it, the more competitive the company will be. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you very much, Iskandar. All right, can you unshare your screen? Yeah. Thank you very much, Iskandar. I think he shared a lot. Okay, just nice. We have got another about 20 minutes, for us to interact. All right. So I think the last point interesting, right? Because we look at the company, right? Subsequently, even now, I'm aware that some company in Europe market especially, they put the requirement for any suppliers, even service provider, to meet that so-called related to net zero requirement. For example, energy management, green, and all that. So bear in mind, our country is export based. When it comes to manufacturing, we are mostly export. We are assemblers and all that. I think it's a pressure for local companies. To if you are supplying as a vendors and all that, it'll be a requirement, because companies like BMW, Toyota, all that moving towards that. So like it or not, whoever supplying to them, associated with them, has to take the same action. If not, either you are ship in or you are ship out. Simple as that. So with that, I open to the session now to all. All right, just kinda keep your video open. People wanted to see you. All right, please. Anyone? Any question?
Zaini, I think there is one question in the chat from Mr. Lal.
Mr. Lal.
EV don't help in decarbonizing when electricity to charge the batteries is from fossil fuel, as in Peninsular Malaysia. You are very right, Mr. Lal. But I think as we move forward, I think EV will play a bigger role as more electricity is going to be generated using clean energy. So, and as it is now, yes, I think claiming EV to be super green when the electricity is still carbon based, it's maybe a bit misleading, but I think this is the way forward. I think as technology improves, more source of energy will be from renewable, hopefully.
Yeah, agree. I think we can't be ideal, fortnightly, right? So at least take the steps, right? Even you're talking about solar now. The only thing is totally green is just the solar power, right? The rest is not yet. So I think, but still going for solar, still better option than fossil fuel. Okay, another question? Any question? Thank you, Mr. Lal, for asking any question. Others? How about others? Please.
Hi, Iskandar. How are you guys doing?
Yes, Mr. Deep Kumar. Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm a climate change sustainability consultant. Used to work with these two gentlemen, previous project. So very interesting presentation on GSG reporting, especially in the corporate sector. I think 5 years ago, or a few years ago, the government launched this My Carbon initiative, but that didn't work out. So moving forward, since we are going to have voluntary carbon trading schemes coming into play, which I'm just seeing whether it's going to benefit the SMEs. Do they have the capacity to do GSG reporting or participate in the program, or will it just benefit the big companies? Those like Petronas and TNB and all that. Those heavily invested in Malaysia. So yeah, maybe your thoughts on carbon trading schemes in Malaysia.
Thank you, Mr. Deep Kumar. I think Iskandar, give your piece first before I share mine, if you don't.
Thank you, Deep.
Others also later I open to answer for, maybe you can share thought what Mr. Deep Kumar mentioned just now. Others also. Okay, please, Iskandar, please.
Thank you, Deep. I think, yes, if you look at the SMEs, they are the backbone of our economy. Maybe this is going to potentially to be added task or job to them and added cost to them. But unfortunately, this is something that they can run away from. As the supply chain requirement, as the millennial demand for more greener products, they will have to do it. The only way that I see how can this be done is maybe for the government to come up with way to assist SMEs, either by hand holding them in terms of providing consultancies, at least on the carbon reporting, before they even need to understand the concept about carbon trading and carbon things as is planned now. So I think, and I personally feel that I think the government needs to do something. Schemes or at least assistance has to be provided to all our SMEs. What more now that Europe already putting in their cross-border carbon tax proposal, which I think is coming operation in the next year or so. This will put all our industries in a disadvantage if they do not understand how to do it properly. So I think awareness assistance in terms of preparing carbon footprint is important.
Thank you, Iskandar. Any others wanted to respond to the question raised by Mr. Deep Kumar just now? Anyone? Feel free to. All right. So one question, okay, I think this part, Mr. Deep Kumar, maybe I want to add my point here. I think it is not, not a need, it's a must for government to start to into building the capacity on the ability to ensure this SME, have the ability, to do the reporting. Not only that, also the validation. Because now I think companies like Petronas or all the giants, they can engage consultant, foreign consultant, they can pay to do all the reporting for them, even to validate them, they can engage other third party. But for SMEs, if by doing this kind of reporting added, cost to them, unnecessarily, especially during the very volatile climate, economic climate now, it's not necessary for them to build the balance. So I think this is where I think government must have that action, take the action before they start to impose on the. Otherwise, the one that will benefit is basically all the giants, not SMEs. Even SMEs may lose a lot because they can't meet all the requirements when it comes to reporting. Okay, so I got one more question here from Mr. Thomas, TP Thomas. It is kind of, what about carbon credit purchasing which support local programs to reduce GSG? Any thoughts on that?
Yes, that would be interesting. I think with the current announcement by the government about going to put in place a voluntary carbon market, domestic carbon trading market, it will probably help us. But without knowing in details about how the mechanism, the structures of the thing is going to be, I think it's a bit too early for us to comment. But I think it's a good move. I think this is just my personal thought. I think one of the main reason why the government is now considering this voluntary carbon market, it's not mandatory, So when it's about voluntary, it's all about sell and purchase of carbon credit in order to reduce your carbon footprint to go toward carbon neutral. Okay, what is carbon neutral? What is carbon net zero? Carbon neutral tend to be where you use a lot of offset to just neutralize the carbon related to that activity. That's why recently we heard a few big oil announcing that they are transporting carbon neutral natural gas to China. So how is it become carbon neutral? They make it carbon neutral because they make use of the carbon credits to balance out whatever is going to be emitted in respect to extraction, processing, and transportation, as well as usage of the gas when it arrived to the end user in China. So it has been offsetted by purchasing carbon offset or carbon credit. So this is something good that the carbon credits, voluntary carbon credit is going to be put in place. I think one of the main reasons why this was decided, this is just my thought, is because I think our country is a bit worried with respect to if we develop projects here in Malaysia and we start selling our carbon credit to foreign countries, are we able to still claim those carbon credit as our country carbon reduction, or is it going to go to the other side? So these are issues I think needs to be considered as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Encik Iskandar. Thank you, Mr. Thomas, for asking question. Any more question from all the audience here, please? All right.
There is a question from Mr. Tan with regards to whether my company can do carbon credit audits and certification for projects. We have the skill to do it. Unfortunately, we need to be able to be certified by whoever is going to be in control of all those carbon credits. Normally, what happens when you want to develop a project into a carbon credit is you need to identify where you want to register your project. There are a few voluntary projects, carbon credit registry, they call it, that is available worldwide, such as Gold Standard. That's one of it. Vera is also one of it. A few more. So if you're going, let's say, if you go for Gold Standard type of registration, they will have their own certified auditors that can then verify your projects, look at your project document, and approve your project. So I think we're excited about this, what do you call it, Malaysia voluntary carbon trading mechanism to be announced. They will then have to identify who are the registry to register all the projects, how it is going to be recorded, and who are the verifiers that allow to look at projects. So I think this is an interesting scope opening up for a lot of us, and we can't wait to see the details actually once it's announced.
Encik Iskandar, one more question here from Dato' TS Dr. Gunalan from Sivam. A question here, I think I also can help to answer this one. Is there any incentive for industry to reduce carbon footprint? I think there are incentives, but not directly per se so-called carbon footprint project kind of incentive, but somehow if you now implementing any project related to RE, renewable energy, or energy efficiency, they have government do provide incentive now since early 2000. Okay, the incentive come in the form of ITA, okay, import duty exemption, ITA, or they call it JITA or JITE, all right, on that. So you can look, if you go to MIDA website, there are incentives. In fact, the only thing is that, I would say for the renewable energy incentive, there are a lot of take-ups, a lot of takers. But unfortunately for energy efficiency, still not so much, even though incentive is quite similarly attractive as well. So there are incentives, but not direct so-called reduce carbon footprint incentive, but indirectly, for example, energy efficiency, reduce kilowatt hour and all that, they can also contributing to the reduction of the carbon footprint as well. So you can go to site MIDA website, it's all is there, all right?
Yeah, I think just to add to that, directly as a carbon related, it's not. I think the incentive is more on for you to reduce your carbon footprint, and with that, I think as the industries, like I said earlier on, the supply chains going forward, this is incentive enough for you to be one of the leader in having the lowest carbon footprint companies or so forth. There's one question from Mr.
Encik Saleh ni, carbon footprint and net zero, are these reflected and heavyweight item in ESG?
Yes, it is. I think moving forward, because all public listed companies registered on KLIC, I think the ESG's report for 2021 will probably have to include carbon footprint. More just at the moment, their carbon footprint maybe not zero yet, because until then, previously they are only reporting on their energy use. But I know about this because I have been assisting quite a few public listed companies in preparing their carbon footprint so that it is ready for the next ESG report, which typically due maybe middle of next year.
Okay, we have about 6 minutes left before we reach 4:30. Please ask any question. You can share your thought also, not just question, right? You can also share your thought. What do you think? What do you think about this? You know, where are you? You know, any idea, any suggestion? You know.
Yeah.
So please.
There is a message from Encik Faizul.
Yes.
He has already checked with CASA. Currently, our voluntary carbon trading also refer to gold standard and Vera, which yes. I'm happy to hear, because there is no point for us to design a new wheel. We just make do with all the standards that's already available. Yeah. Coming up with standards for all of this is not an easy task, and it's expensive. So we should just use all the methodologies that is already available, and just maybe register the projects internally here in Malaysia rather than abroad. This is a good news. Thank you, Encik Faizul.
Sometimes there is a good thing become latecomers, right? Yes. Anyone share your thoughts? You know. So I see so many people here. You know, Prof. Dr. David Martin here. You know, we have Encik Abu Haris, Engineer Abu Haris, right? And then Dr. Jeffrey here from UM, right? Please, any question, any thought? What do you think about this topic? I think this one just an overview, right? You know, if you want to go for training, you can contact Iskandar. All right. Any question from others? You can see Encik Batia, Encik Muhammad Mawardi. All right. I mentioned few names here. Puan Azlina Jalaluddin. Okay. Any question, any thought about this topic? Mr. Tan, BP Tan. Cik Sadali Mustafa. No question. We have 4 more minutes. Yes.
Ya, Tuan Zaini. Assalamualaikum, Tuan Zaini.
Siapa ni?
Sazali.
Cik Sazali, please. Ya, Cik Sazali, please. Yes.
Okay, saya just nak tanya je lah. Contoh kita cakap carbon footprint semua kan. Maybe the government kena ada satu yang volunteer, macam contoh dia bagi satu bagi iktirafan lah, macam SEDA dia ada buat kan, Green Pass punya volunteer. So daripada Green Pass volunteer tu dia ada keluarkan satu sijil mengatakan berapa banyak dah CO2 kita reduce. So yang itu bagus lah, kita boleh kata orang kendiri lah sendiri.
Recognition lah.
Emission tu. Itu sajalah.
Very good. I think we expect more and more to come. All right. One thing that obvious, you know, very soon. Okay. If you heard recently, very recent. I think about 1 or 2 days ago, the big announcement about the new act, you know, will be come into place. The act on the energy efficiency and energy conservation. This will cover electrical and thermal energy. Alright, so I think one, of course, somehow me and Encik Iskandar to be involved. I cannot share that much because it's embargo, but somehow you can expect, you know, we are now quite good in RE, right? You know, we are quite somehow moving very fast on the RE, renewable energy now. I think when the act coming on board, all right, you expect if you are large energy user, you expect to be more requirement for you to even to report. Okay, because the current law only covering electrical energy, but the new act expected to cover thermal. Instead, you have gas, you have fuel, everything. You also need to do some kind of managing your resource as well. So this something will be coming. I think when that coming, right, I think all the recognition naturally will come as well. I think even now we have the so-called the National Energy Awards every year. All right, you know, every year we got National Energy Award. Now you will be recognized now, RE and EE projects and all that. So I think the very good, you know, point for that, Encik Sazali. I think expect more to come. Expect more to come. All right.
I just want to add to what Encik Sazali was mentioning just now. I think it's a good idea. I think in a sense, you need to track your own carbon footprint. Sebenarnya untuk buat carbon reporting ni, especially for scope 1 and scope 2, which I think semua company patut start buat dah, is very simple. Because all the data is with you. You just need to identify the emission factor je. And the emission factor yang selalu orang pakai pun is available on IPCC punya 2016 punya apa tu. Just use that. And then you can identify, if you have data 2-3 tahun lepas and things like, identify where you should put your baseline. And then from there you track. And then of course, once you dah very up to date with your scope 1 and scope 2 ni, then you start to look at where are the hot spot in your scope 3, which is basically with regards to your upstream and downstream. Estimation for that pun can be done by looking at basically how much you spend for the services and things like that. So by looking at it, I think what I'm trying to say here is you don't really need any specialist credential to be able to do carbon footprint reporting. And the only thing is that if you want to go and get your report to be certified, then you have to follow specific way. This is similar to you go for certification of your ISO 9000 and things like that. By at least keeping everything transparent, accurate, consistent, and things like that, which are the key principles of GSG reporting, similar to any all ISO related punya kerja.
Okay, thank you, Encik Iskandar. I think on the dot, 4:30, we have to follow Japan. We start at sharp and we finish at sharp. Anyway, 4:30 now. Again, all the slides, if you wanted to have the slide from Encik Iskandar, you just email to info@zaini4e.com. I think I put in the chat box, all right? You can email, I can reply accordingly for those who are interested, all right? And then Encik Iskandar number also I put in the chat box for you to reach to Encik Iskandar, all right, as well. So I think, again, thank you very much, Encik Iskandar, for your time, for your sharing, very insightful. Me personally learning a lot as well. This is something I need to explore as well, because this is the way forward. This is the trend. This is the coming things, everything. And then thank you, everyone, okay, to everyone who are spreading this news about this event and joining this event, spend your valuable time, 1.5 hour for this knowledge sharing session. I hope, we can see you in the next session. Kalau ada apa-apa kekurangan, saya minta maaf, kelemahan saya. Anything, yang good, all come from the Almighty. With that, I think again, for those who want to get slides, send me the email. I can reply accordingly. And then I hope, we can see you again, inshallah, in the next sharing session in 2022, inshallah. Even if you have my email, you can suggest what topic should I share, or what so that I can find the right people to share, like Encik Iskandar, today. I think he shared a lot, right? It's not also easy to get him as well. All right. Okay. With that, thank you very much, everyone. Hope to see you again.
Thank you.
Okay. Stay safe, everyone. Okay. Today he mentioned about the Omicron variant has arrived in Malaysia. So be mindful, stay safe. All right. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and salam sejahtera.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you all.